So the goal of tonight is to sort of highlight the key components of it as it relates to our remote start, as well as to, again, align the full blueprint options with in everyone's minds, so that, you know, as we continue to move forward the decision-making process, we are basing it on our common understanding of the plan. So I just put together a timeline of the COVID communications starting on March 12th with our first emergency closure, leading up to, actually, there was a new update today from the Illinois State Board of Education. There was another update, some new guidance. Simply to point out that throughout these past few months, we have continued to address the changing guidance, to develop our plan in stages and in steps, and try to keep everyone informed as we move through this process. I want to highlight then the core of our plan. And again, when we published this plan, we started writing it back in May. It's gone through a number of iterations. But the core principles of our plan remain the same, whether we're in phase 1 through phase 5, whether we are able to be in person or remote. The core principles that we use to develop the plan are focusing on ensuring that the health and safety of our students, staff, community to the greatest extent possible, mitigating those risk factors, to focus and prioritize our teaching and learning to be the essential targets with our limited time and that we have in our instructional days, to make sure that we're making the best use of that time. We continue to have sort of that growing concern about the learning loss or the learning slide that we need to then also address. We've been very cognizant of and aware of the family and community impact. We do not take any of our decisions lightly, especially knowing that there are a number of really difficult decisions that we make, that families have to make. This is a community-wide pandemic, and it impacts lots and lots of decisions and lots of different factors, but that's been a key component. And then for us as stewards of the community and taxpayers' dollars, we also need to make sure that what we are doing and what we are implementing are done in a responsible way, and not setting up future generations for struggling to make payroll and those types of things. We're obviously going to spend more money. We have already talked about that in terms of the budget. We have maximized our current grant dollars and will continue to do so, but you know, we do not have an endless supply of cost. And then of course the other factor is complexity. We're very fortunate that as a smaller district compared to some others in our area, we have the ability to act pretty nimbly, to move and implement change and coordinate that amongst our many stakeholders and staff. But even as a small district, for us to put out a new schedule, for example, will take my principals at least a week to reshuffle and sort people. And we need to connect with transportation, and we need to coordinate with food service. So while I wish we could pivot in a dime, to do that effectively really does take some foresight and long-term planning. So our plan has to be responsive in terms of its complexity. It can't be something that looks great on paper that we just cannot really implement. So our plan design, as it exists currently, is still for a full in-person option and a full distance learning 2.0 option. We're still committed to providing parent choice in terms of the different plan options that we're able to develop. And our plan is responsive to those different conditions. So we have a plan ready if we return to phase 3. We have a plan ready if phase 4 looks like it's a full go ahead for us, and anything in between. So the plan itself, the framework of the plan, really just highlights what our approach will be. We then have the flexibility to pivot to meet the different conditions. So let's talk a little bit about some of the specifics. I know this is what many are waiting for, and I thank our principals last week for putting out their communication where they were able to sort of send some of these dates out for folks. Today, student schedules or homeroom assignments was emailed home, so that has occurred. Between today and Friday, we've asked all faculty, all teachers, to do a personalized greeting to their students to welcome them back to the new school year. For some, that'll be a video. For some, that'll be a postcard. For some, that'll be an email, but something to connect the teacher to the students should be coming in the next couple of days. This Friday, we will produce 2 documents. At the district level, we'll produce our school scene, which we do the Friday after every board meeting. And the buildings will also be putting out a communication, again, just sort of reiterating some of the key components. In those plans, we will have the links to our parent resources, which are also linked at the end of this document. Some technology guides, which we will talk about a little bit later, that will help parents to navigate through the setup and the expectations for instruction, as well as updated supply lists. We have also then scheduled virtual sessions for parents to participate in on all the dates that are listed here: August 25, 27, September 1, 3, and 10. And each one of those events, each one of those evenings is intended to focus on a different topic. For example, setting up your home learning environment. Some of the things that we heard that we weren't able to do as we switched on a dime in March, but that we know would be helpful. Sort of how do we help parents create those learning expectations? How do we help parents establish those schedules? What are some of the specific tools that we have in terms of how do we use Schoology, how do I use Seesaw, etc. So those parent nights are specifically geared for troubleshooting and supporting families. Then we also have a virtual curriculum night, which would have been our traditional back to school, scheduled for August the 28th. That will be a virtual version of that, where the curriculum for the schools, the staff for the schools will be introduced, and the goals for each of the schools will be introduced. So those are all going to be, again, further detailed in our communication on Friday. We've scheduled a materials pickup for the 17th and a secondary makeup date for the 18th for all students in grades 1 through 8, which we will talk about on the next slide. And then our first day of school, of instruction, will be, as it has been scheduled, for Wednesday, August 19th. We look for August 24th to be the kindergarten and EC program materials pickup days, as well as the first day for early childhood. And the first day for kindergarten is August 27th. All of those first days are the same as they've been in our calendar for the last since we adopted in March. So materials pickup. Specifically, we know that starting the year without that face-to-face relationship is really challenging. So to the extent possible, we want to sort of replicate our parade that we did at the end of last school year. That was a really positive way to say goodbye, to create a way for us to say hello. So we have the parade route will be the same as it was in May or June. There will be an in-person greeting to the greatest extent possible with the child's teacher. We'll be distributing in grades 1 through 4 the new iPads, as well as the supplies, workbooks, curriculum materials, other supplies that our teachers are pulling together to present to our students. And the times are included here, as well as in the newsletters for August 17th in the morning session, and then there's an afternoon session for some grades with an evening option on August the 18th for all grades. And then again, we're scheduling that on August 24th in the morning for kindergarten and in the afternoon for early childhood, with a follow-up evening pickup as well. So the key question, talking about frequently asked questions, this is the most frequently asked question. So what will be different about distance learning 2.0? And this graphic is one that we have used in our newsletters the last few times. And it really has been something that we developed purposefully, and we started purposefully with Distance Learning 2.0 back in May, because we knew from the data that we've been gathering from our parent surveys, from our student surveys, from our staff surveys, from our own observations, from our own interactions, there were things that we knew we wanted to do differently given a couple of months to plan. You have to remember that between March 12th and then March 16th, we had one Institute Day where the staff came together on a Friday, and we quickly put together a response, and then we implemented that response right before spring break, refined it throughout the spring, but we recognized that there were a number of components that were less than ideal for us. So given the time in Distance Learning 2.0, you would find that most of the concerns are addressed in terms of this new Distance Learning 2.0 that were identified as negative or less than what we had hoped for in the spring. So this was, again, a collaboratively developed plan. We'll be doing daily attendance by the teachers through PowerSchool as they normally do, with a fixed schedule. We've got new content that we'll be introducing, obviously, and that the direct instruction will be much more a present component of the plan, of the distance learning. Feedback and grading was something that ISB had mandated in the spring to go one direction. We have been able to sort of reclaim the decision-making around feedback and grading. And so you'll see that again as a component, as well as, continued assignments and some assessments that we are going to use to help us to understand where our students' strengths and needs may lie. And then, of course, we had some technology available, but I want to give a shout out to Maria and our tech crew, as well as Amy and Amy, for really working the grant dollars that were available to us to be able to purchase iPads for kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, which we had not been able to do in our current budget plan. But those CARES dollars were intended to be used for access to instruction, and so we're able to launch a one-to-one iPad ratio. I'm going to ask Amy Zaire, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, to just kind of speak through a couple of these slides. All
right, so as Don pointed out, we're trying to really make the difference of what instruction is going to be looking like differently in Distance Learning 2.0. Over the summer, we did a lot of planning for in-person, and then being able to flip the switch if we had to Distance Learning 2.0. With that in mind, we tried to build everything from our schedules to the way we think about the content and the curriculum, and try to go from there. So the first thing we want to really point out that is different is that this is, as Don said, going to be actual instruction. So a lot of times we talked about, last time was maybe posting things or assigning things. This is actually teaching. So we have been doing a lot of work around talking about videotaping our lessons, making sure that we are able to capture the students who were in person in front of us, and at home. Now we're focusing on, since we're starting remotely, we're focusing on that distance learning with instruction at home. It's regular, it's going to be new content, it's not just going to be reposting of old things, because we have to move forward. They talk about the COVID slide, and so we have a big major focus on literacy and math instruction, and this is happening daily. So not just posting things again, but actual live instruction. We'll talk about a little bit of the schedule later. We also have some of the questions that I get all the time are we going to have math? Are we going to have PE? Are we going to have music? All of those things, we built schedules to be in person and then be able to pivot remotely. So everything we're offering in person would also be offered as a distance learning 2.0 option. So all of those things are happening. It's both live and recorded because we understand that perhaps some kids will be at a daycare. Perhaps some students might be at grandma's house where they might have a hard time getting on the live instruction. Obviously, we want to have that live instruction because that live instruction is going to have that interaction between teachers and students. It's the best way to learn. But if they're not able to do that, the students will be able to access that recorded session as well. So we want to increase the accountability of students and teachers. Back in that chart that Don showed, they had last year where students weren't held accountable and we didn't have any real testing. Sometimes we gave some tests, but it wasn't really recorded with a pass, incomplete option. Now it is just like in person school, we will be holding students and teachers accountable through traditional grading. So it's A through F grades in the grades 3 through 8, and the traditional grading we use for the elementary. So the work time, this is one of the questions that I get all the time is, well, my kids were done within 15 minutes and now they're going to be finished with school. What are we going to do with them then? This is going to be about the same time as if they were in person. So our classes are scheduled for the same times as we built the schedules as in person, because our focus was in-person instruction up until just recently. So the same time you have math time in person is the same time you would have at distance learning 2.0. So we'll see a sample schedule in a minute. Within that lesson, in distance learning 2.0, there might be a main focus of the math lesson. Perhaps if a math period is about an hour long, then you might not be on the Google Meet for the whole hour. We might do some direct instruction for 20 minutes or so. There might be, okay, you guys go and do some of this independent work. Teacher may be available for questions online or ask the teacher if they need help. But all of that would be included with the math time. Some other questions I get is, will I have some small group work? Well, usually in the middle school, there's not a lot of small group work, but in the elementary, yes, our teachers are planning for those types of ways to interact with large groups, small groups, and independents as much as possible. We're also coordinating with the student services and with IEPs and 504 plans, and working with the classroom teachers to arrange those things. Sometimes it's push-in, sometimes it's a separate class. All of those things are according to their IEPs. We're also working with our diverse learners and our English language supports as needed, just as we would do in person. And of course, one of the biggest things we want to do is that partnership with parents, because when the parents are successful and it's easy for them to find where the Google Meets are, where their schedules are posted, that's all going to be within our learning platforms of Seesaw and Schoology and will be communicated with parents. So here's some of the sample schedules that I was just referring to. These are samples, obviously. Middle school, if you logged into PowerSchool today, you saw the complete middle school student schedule. For elementary, your teachers, you probably got your homeroom assignment today, but you will get like a schedule like this because each teacher's is different. So they have PE on different days and they have music on different days. So you will get that from your teacher through like Seesaw, one of those platforms that will explain exactly what your child will be doing per day. But it will look something very similar to this. There will be times when we have those morning meetings. That social emotional piece is going to be huge. And really checking in and trying to make those connections. We've been talking with our staff about things that we would normally do in person, we can absolutely do through online as the greatest extent possible. And so getting to know our kids, getting to know them, even through virtual is one of the ways we're gonna talk about through these social emotional learning contact times. Obviously literacy and math are one of the biggest areas that we're going to focus on, but we can't forget about social studies, science, and those special classes. There's also time for acceleration and intervention when we need that extra time. Students need that support. We have built that into some of the timeframes as well.
Thank you, Amy. Again, just to round out some of the other frequently asked questions, will there be vocal and instrumental music? Yes. It'll be modified. There's a letter going out from the music department folks about the ways that they are going to provide those experiences. But yes, vocal and instrumental music, extremely important. Clubs, activities, and sports. Are we going to continue to hold those? Yes, as appropriate and in virtual settings, in compliance with the changing guidance from IESA and some of the other organizations. But yes, clubs, activities, sports, again, essential parts of what kids need to experience in their schooling. Will there be homework? Yes, likely some work completed outside of DL2 times. Again, the student is not going to be seated in front of their laptop or their iPad for 8 hours straight in the morning. They're going to have their movement breaks. They're going to have their lunch breaks. They're going to have some independent work time, but some of the work may need to be completed outside of that time, just as it is during the school year. Will we be sharing specific online expectations in terms of what parents should expect, what students should expect, what's expected of our students? The answer there again, yes. We are sending that message that the Google Meet or the virtual medium is the same expectation for behavior as it would be if you were seated in school. So you need to be on time. Kids need to pay attention. They need to be engaged in the lesson. And there are some tools that our teachers now have that we did not have in the spring that will allow us to make that a little bit more easy to monitor and manage. Will there be support for access? So we've given devices out and we'll be doing so this fall, but there are still, we know, some families that have a challenge in terms of the internet access. And so, yes, there's support for that for families in need who should connect with their building principal for those options. Registration fees. Why am I paying registration fees if my kid is not in school? Understand that thinking, but yes, registration fees are still a part of our back to school because we're still providing materials, access to curriculum, online programs, devices, etc., as well as the instruction in a virtual setting. Will teachers be working from school? Yes, to the greatest extent possible. Our teachers have asked to be able to teach from school because they know that the resources, the classroom setting will help to establish that norm. As we transition back into in-person instruction, then there's not as big a jump for students. They'll be able to understand and see the classroom environment. Amy talked a little bit about SEL, social emotional support. What about additional support, more than perhaps just the normal whole group support? And again, the answer there is yes. Contacting the building principal, the social worker, or the psychologist. As we would if we were in person, those staff are available to connect with parents and talk to students and work with kids as they might need to. And then will there be new tools? Again, you'll notice the upgraded Google Meets tool that we were able to secure this fall that we did not have in the spring, which has more features for breakout rooms, for blocking Zoom bombers, which is why we don't like to use Zoom, but as well as the ability for teachers to call kids back and manage that dynamic more similarly to the way they would in in-person instruction. This next slide, I just want to highlight again some of the wellness components. Amy talked a little bit about the instruction. This statement about we're all in the same boat was one that really struck me, because we're not all in the same boat. We may all be in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. For some of us, there are additional stressors, there are additional financial, familial, community stressors. For some of us, there are illnesses. For some of us, there are additional work stressors. So we recognize greatly that we're not all in the same boat, but that we are all going through the same storm. So it's important for us to be responsive to the fact that one family may be better equipped and better able to weather the storm, and others are really struggling. And this is why in a pandemic and in this type of setting, we need to come together as a community without blame and without judgment, to understand and appreciate the differences in our community, to be filled with grace and kindness toward one another, first and foremost, trying to make sure that we can support each other as best as possible. So part of our instruction is focused on those social and emotional lessons. How do we cope with stress in our lives? How can we be good friends to classmates? What does making a friend look like in a virtual setting or in this face mask wearing setting? We will also then, again, we talked about those virtual expectations. We're tying those back to our PBIS system. Be safe, be respectful, be responsible is just as applicable in person as it is at home. And so we need to define for students what that looks like. So we'll have more opportunities here for some activities to promote social interactions within a class, within a school building, even across the whole district, that there are some really fun things that we have been planning, some different ways of doing a pep assembly when you can't bring everybody together in the gym, but a way to really celebrate our schools and our students. So we'll be looking at those types of things. We know that parents are also stressed. Being one myself, I just dropped my son off at Tennessee, and he's a freshman down there, and so I understand the stress that we all feel. And so we know that there need to be more supports for parents in terms of how do I navigate these systems? Where are the tools available to me? And we'll show you a couple of those in a minute. And then again, we will be building in more purposeful check-in and individual one-on-one time to check with parents. How are things going from your end? What support can we provide you? To check in with students. How are you doing? Not just like what grades are you getting, but like how are you doing, and what support do you need? So those are all very important pieces. And we recognize lastly that for some students, particularly those at risk or perhaps those who have special education specific needs, that we need to prioritize their ability to be back in session. Even in a phase 3, for example, where there are limitations of 10 people in a space, we may need to bring in small groups because the services that students may require, we're just not able to do in a virtual setting. We talked a lot about the technology piece, but again, just for clarity, all students, grades K through 8, will be issued a district iPad that will have our management software loaded on. It will have our self-service app, and will have the ability for us to manage those devices. Grades K through 5 will use the premium version of Seesaw that we also secured late in last spring, as well as 6 through 8 continuing with Schoology. Teachers, just today, we had 93 teachers in our Passport to Learning professional development session this morning, which was focused on using tech tools and becoming more comfortable with some of the features of these tools. And then this afternoon, we had another 100+ teachers participate in our summer summit, which was a planning event. So we know that we need to provide that support to our staff. We know that we will have troubleshooting and help tickets put in for teachers and students. And then again, as I said, we also know that our parents will need additional support. So we've scheduled some of those topics. We've recorded some videos that'll be on demand for parents, as well as that help and ticketing system for parents also. One of the things that we're most proud of, given this pandemic, is the number of meals that we've been able to distribute. And I'm going to ask Amy McPartlin, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, to talk about operations.
Thanks, Don. So as Don talked about, between March 13th and the end of July, in cooperation with our food service providers, we worked to distribute approximately 290,000 bags to our community. As we transition back into the school year, we will kind of abandon the summer food service method of distribution and work with our food service provider, Organic Life, to go into the National School Lunch Program, which is the program that we typically participate in throughout the school year. We're going to start our distributions back up next Wednesday, August 19th. They'll be held between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock at the MacArthur cafeteria, where we had been holding the previous distributions. This time, what's going to be different from the summer food service is that we will be required to request the name and the PIN number for each student, and then those students' mealtime accounts will be charged for those meals that they're picking up. So any students that would qualify for free or reduced meals will be charged accordingly, and students that typically pay full price for their meals will be charged that rate as well. Again, something that's a little bit different, we had previously been distributing 7-day bags. These will be 5-day bags, then we'll do those again every week. One of the other components that we've been spending a lot of time on is our transportation and what that will look like when we return to school in person. Today we did send out notifications to families in grades 1 through 8 with regard to their new stop locations. We are going to be implementing common stops throughout the district. We've discussed that with the board the past couple of meetings, and the shift there is that all stop locations will be consistent regardless of the school that your children attend. So we did hear that was a concern from several parents last year, kind of the frustration and the thoughts regarding multiple kids at different stop locations. So we wanted to make sure we were able to address that for them. With regard to the extended day program, working with Chris Lebret and her team, we will, currently that program is on hold until we do return in person. Once we do return, then obviously we'll need to follow current governor's guidelines to make sure that we're operating within the parameters and number of students in a space. So more to come on that as we work towards coming back to school in person.
Federal waiver?
What?
Federal waiver for the extended school lunch?
Yeah, that has not, yeah, Don is asking about the extension of the federal food service waiver. We have not gotten any additional information on that. So at this point, we will be transitioning to the National School Lunch Program.
So given all of this, how are we ever going to come back? We've been giving this a lot of thought, and as Sarah mentioned, there has been a growing consistent request for a little bit more uniformity in what the metrics are for being able to safely return for in-person instruction. So these are, I want to preface this by saying these are our current thoughts as District 23. We have been given guidance, and these are our interpretations, but we are hopeful that there will be more clarity given through the state, through the Department of Public Health, et cetera. And I really want us to think about this in terms of these three questions. They are not standalone questions, and they are not individual bullet point items. It really is the blending of all of these different thoughts, because each of them in one way, shape, or form, has an impact on the others. And it's not as simple as to just look at one data point and say, if that point, then everything else. There are so many factors. So trying to think about it in terms of compliance, we need to be able to say with confidence that we are able to implement our plan and in-person instruction in compliance with these factors. We need to say that in terms of remote instruction as well, and having staff in the buildings, having our teachers teaching from their classrooms. We still need to comply with all of the health and safety guidelines, as well as the limitations on size, like we have in our socially distant board meeting tonight. Obviously, health and safety, again, we need to make sure that we can mitigate that risk to the best extent possible. Here we're looking at a couple of data points. Locally for Region 10, which is the suburban Cook region of Illinois, it's the region that we are located in, we're watching that positivity rate for infection. That is one of the state's guidelines. They have set a bar of 8%, and we are currently just at 6%. That's continued to grow from 4.9 or thereabouts over the summer. We're actually now at the same point we were in April in the spring. So that's part of what's at play is in terms of that infection rate. That's one of the things that we're very conscious of, bringing 1,500 or to 1,000 students back on campus into our buildings. What would the impact of that be? And certainly wanting to be responsible for our community to not contribute to further spread. Currently, that number is not trending downward. It's currently trending upward, which causes us to pause. The CDC has indicated a 5% positivity rate as their recommendation. So even among the two departments of health, we have some conflict. We're between 5 and 8 right now at 6%. We also need to make sure that we have adequate PPE, cleaning, sanitization, supplies, et cetera. Anybody who tried to buy toilet paper in March knows that's one of the challenges. We cannot open school if I can't get toilet paper. It's as simple as that. It's one of those factors. We're required to provide the PPE, the hand sanitizers, the cleaning supplies, and as all of you know from shopping at Costco, there are limits on the availability of some of those things. Currently, we're in a really good place with that. I give Brian Rominski, our Director of Buildings and Grounds, Amy McPartlin, a lot of credit for being on this early and placing our orders and securing our plexiglass dividers and all the PPE and so forth. But that's one of the other factors. And then the last factor that we think about are the sustainability and the consistency of instruction. One of the things that I think is that weighs most heavily on my mind is the roller coaster of opening, closing, telling our parents, yes, we're going to be open, plan on us being open, and then pulling the rug out from underneath families and saying, just kidding, we weren't able to do it. So as I said, I know that that is not an easy decision. It was not an easy decision to make. It's not easy for families to cope with. But for me, that consistency of knowing, at least I know what the game plan is, and we're not throwing curveballs at people, is really important. Part of that has to do with our ability to staff. Part of it has to do with our ability for our vendors to staff. If our bus drivers can't drive buses, I can't run schools. If my food service folks can't come in, I can't run schools. If my custodial crew is unable to make it to work, I can't run schools. So it's on and on and on in terms of capacity. We need to make sure that we have that fully planned with backup and with substitutes, so that once we're open, we know we can consistently stay open. And then again, as you know, locally and regionally, there have been many decisions. We're in many partnerships with other districts. We have lots of interconnections with other districts. And so there are factors when one district chooses to act. It does cause an effect on some of the others. So I share these again as our current best thinking as to why we made the decision to start remotely, but also know that we're monitoring all of these and working on our plans for a return to instruction. So some of these will begin actually here in September. We recognize that some of our self-contained special education students and students requiring in-person physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapies, those types of services that are really quite difficult to provide via virtual means, that we need to provide some opportunities for those students to have in-person instruction. They're our first targeted group to bring back, and we hope to do so in early September. We recognize also our early childhood program, 3 and 4-year-olds sitting with an iPad to receive instruction is by no means ideal. We know that most of their learning is experiential, and so our early childhood, our kindergarten, our at-risk programs would be the second group and third group that we'd be looking to roll back in terms of a hybrid restart. We're targeting September 25th as our next decision point. So after we start the year, we will then begin the process of, okay, where do we plan on being by this point? And where are we at with transportation and food service and staffing, and how do we modify our schedules? What might we need to do differently? So that by October 5th, we have a plan in place that will either be one or combination of these components. Again, an AM-only hybrid model, for example, is one that we investigated earlier in the summer. A split cohort where we're reducing class size to approximately 50% to be fully compliant with a 6-foot social distance. That would require us to modify our schedule a bit. Continuing the distance learning as an option or potentially as a requirement, or being in a position to bring back all students as we had planned for those that chose full in person. So that's sort of our next task as we're looking at rolling our restart after we get things back up and running in next week. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to point out a couple of them. These links are live currently. Obviously, we continue to ask folks to go to our district website, to our Blueprint homepage for the FAQ. But I do want to point out this technology guides, and if this works, hey, look at that. I think it worked. Can you see the next technology guide screen at home? All right. So this is our landing page. All of these links are intended to be supports for parents. You can select them by school. So I'll pick MacArthur since we're here at MacArthur today. And here you have hyperlinks to all of the kinds of helpful suggestions, tips, tools, etc. that you might need. And then they're linked here below. So for students, how to use your iPad, how to take care of your iPad, how to log into Schoology. Sometimes we parents need to remember that. And so there are video tutorials on how to do those things. And on and on. I won't go through them all, but you'll see that there are a number of these resources. And I want to again give a shout out to our technology integration specialists, to Maria, to the whole team who spent all summer redesigning these resource pages so that parents have access in real time to some guides and some supports as they're engaged in supporting their student from home. And again, these links are currently live. The presentation will be live, and we'll include these links this Saturday in our, this Friday in our school scene. And I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments from the board.
ABC, we talked a little bit about, like, I mean, we talked about kind of what do we do for assessments, right, and helping to get going in the first few weeks. I mean, can you kind of talk about like how you're changing those plans or what's even feasible?
You restate the question.
So yeah, the question was, what are we doing about assessments and how does that work within the first few weeks of schooling? So assessments are all of the companies like MAP, and we're not using MAP, but we use FastBridge, and we're using Diagnostic. All of those things, the whole companies have flipped their script on how to give these assessments online. Obviously, it's better to get them in person. However, it's not feasible at this time. So we are sending directions home as to how these assessments can be done online to the best fidelity as possible. Part of that is going to be parent education on this. We so always want to help our kids take tests. This is not going to be the time to help them take tests. We really need to know what your child needs, where we are with your child, so that our teachers are able to do some of those acceleration or remediation helps. And so in order to do that, it's going to be very important that when our teachers are saying, okay guys, it's time to take this test online, that we're gonna have to maybe get them set up and step out of the way, especially for the younger students. So these tests will be administered online. The companies have pivoted for those exact reasons, and we will be sending out the schedule for our major testing is already posted on our district's website, but our teachers will tell the students and the parents of like, okay, we're going to be, testing for math, for iReady, so the diagnostic is taken and you'll be able to get on your path. So that's happening.
The only other thing I would add is we are considering the first few days of school as like a welcome week, which is typically what we do when we're in person as well. Learning the routines, understanding the expectations, setting a schedule, getting to know each other in the classroom. So I wouldn't expect to see assessments like next Wednesday, but once we kind of get our feet under us and we get sort of those classroom norms back in place, we know that understanding of where students are on their learning continuum, we know that's a critical point to inform our instruction. So that'll happen probably early September.
For the, I guess could you just walk through a little bit more, like for people with IEPs and diverse learners, like what's that going to be like? I guess I guess there's almost two scenarios, right? For the diverse learners, like when they need to be and when they would have kind of separate group. I mean, is that replacing something else, or is that going to be something in the afternoon? Or can you kind of walk through how that would work, and then also, when will families that that have IEP or would be eligible for in-person learning, like when will they find out kind of about what that schedule will look like?
It really depends on the IEP. Some IEPs have services where the teacher is doing the least restrictive environment, and there is just pushing. So there will be possibly a special ed teacher in the regular ed, gen ed class. That's happening. That's going to continue happening. So it depends on the IEP. When they are going out to a small group, those are also in place. Our teachers have been training and preparing for, some of them receive direct instruction for some of our programs like Horizons and LLI and things like that, that are within their minutes, and they will continue to receive those. So our teachers are preparing for that pullout. Sometimes it's outside of the reading block, sometimes it's during the reading block. It kind of depends on the IEP, but we are planning to stick to those IEPs. And if there is any any differences in what is already listed in their IEP, we have to call the meeting and have the parent involved in that meeting as well, if there are any changes to that. But we're planning to move forward just as we normally have. And with your question of when are we bringing those students back, Dr. Soroka today had a conversation with the team. They are very excited and want to bring those students back as soon as possible. Like, those are the teachers that, and as Don spoke about, those are the students that we really need back as soon as possible. So we are really, as Don said, looking September if possible, like just a few days away.
I had hoped to have those dates listed in the presentation, but literally the team was meeting this afternoon as part of the summer summit to discuss that and to identify students. But that'll happen as a direct email invite or a direct phone call invite from the case manager to students as soon as possible. But I would anticipate early September.
So Amy, because we're going to be doing distance learning 2.0 for the first time as well, what is your or our plan in terms of getting feedback on how distance learning 2.0 is progressing, and how quickly and from whom are you expecting to get feedback and then perhaps make changes accordingly as you've done in spring?
Can you repeat the question, because the screen locked up in the middle of it?
Yeah, the question was, what is our plan for collecting feedback, monitoring progress, and so that we can perhaps modify the plan as we go. And I would direct you to page 24 in our plan. There's the whole page is ongoing monitoring, and it talks about all of the different questions that we're going to be asking and the different data collection methods. But as we did in the spring, parent surveys, student surveys, staff surveys, we did some focus groups this summer as well. We have our ongoing distance learning, or I should say our back to school blueprint committee that has representatives from parents, students, staff, that is a part of the reflection that will happen, especially here by the middle of September or so. That's the reason why we scheduled September 18th as the school e-learning planning day. We wanted to get a couple of weeks under our belt so that if we need to make changes, if we need to modify our plan at all, whether we need to dial things up or dial things back, we're not waiting, the full till October 5th to make any of those changes. So we have a number of those points already scheduled on our end, and that's an absolutely critical component. I know that's what Amy was going to say, is getting feedback is her favorite thing.
For the kind of the synchronous asynchronous learning, I guess, will there kind of be one video per lesson per grade level? Like every student, like if a student misses a day, they're not necessarily going to get a video of their teacher in their class, right? It would be somebody from the team that would have a recording, or I guess maybe you kind of give a general idea of how the video would work.
Brian's question was describe the synchronous and asynchronous instruction. What might that look like?
Yes, so what we're planning on is for the most part, the teacher will have a recording of that video. And it's just like those of you who use Google Drive. Your recording will go into your Google Drive. So it's owned by the teacher. It's not just shared out into the universe and, you know, accessed wherever. It would be shared with the student who needs to have that. But to your question, he also asked the question for those of you online of like, would it just be a teacher in general, or would it be the child's classroom teacher? And if they are sharing a lesson, like if Amy McPartland and I were going to team up on a science lesson and I was going to teach it for the day and show it to her class, it would be, you know, her class would see my lesson. But for the most part, it would be the teachers. If your child missed the lesson and the teacher was teaching it, they would see the lesson from their teacher. Unless, like I said, we are encouraging our teachers to do some teamwork and share some of the responsibilities, because our teachers are flexing in so many ways and learning new ways to do things. So how are we working together to kind of create some of these lessons? And for specials lessons like PE or music, that might be obviously not specific to that class. It might be broadcast across several classes.
That's what I had totally changed topics is for Amy and is how has the new food service vendor been with kind of what we've had to deal with here? And I guess how is everything with them transitioning to the actual program here starting next week?
So Brian's question here is for Amy McPartland, relative to our brand new food service vendor. Welcome to District 23. Oh, by the way, change everything you've ever done. And kind of how have they been to work with, and what's their preparedness level, et cetera?
Yep. So thanks, Brian. That's a good question. Organic, as you recall, we brought the new contract to the board, and Organic Life was scheduled to start their contract July 1st. We asked them to start a month early so that they could jump in and really work with us as we continue to provide the weekly distributions to our families. So they jumped right in. They were very open to continuing to provide what we had been providing with Arlington Heights District 25. I would almost argue that they really kind of improved upon that and had their staff available to assist with the distribution. It ran very smoothly. They have been in each of the kitchens now, getting them up and running and ready to do really whatever we need to have them do. They've been at MAC all week this week. So they're really just now starting to implement exactly the rollout for next week's distributions. Initially, not knowing which way we were going to end up going, we asked them to come up with a really good system for delivering in-classroom meals. I would anticipate that's something that we'll potentially have to shift to once we do return into the school, but they've been terrific, no problems. So, yeah.
I have another question, Amy. This is Gonja. I want to go back to the distance learning. One quick question, but before I do that, I just wanted to thank you again, and the administration, the principal, as well as the group of teachers who have just worked the entire summer to put together such a thorough and a detailed program. And I'm sure we think through everything, and then there's going to be a time where we're going to say, oh, we haven't thought through that. But one of the pain points in spring, especially with the parents, was this: parents had to be involved so much, right? We received the emails, we were there logging the kids up to all the Google emails. I mean, there were times when the Google Meet links were being sent 3 minutes before it was supposed to start. Here I am on a conference call, stop, and like all this stuff. So that is a lot of the anxiety that is still pertaining. Can you just help us, put ourselves at ease a little bit in terms of how are you planning to empower the kids and engage the kids to do what they're supposed to be doing, during the time to kind of make sure that the parents can also take a little breath, if you will. Could you, it's an emotional question, but I think we need to talk through that.
I love that question. Did everyone hear it? It was just like, how do we make sure that we alleviate that stress that parents had? There were links all over the place, and that had to do with kind of that slide that Dr. Angelaccio was talking about. Like, we were in the pandemic mode of like, oh my gosh, we had to flip everything on a dime and teach online. One of the awesome things that all of our teachers learned today was in our Passport to Learning, which Maria led and the TIS team led, is naming conventions for Google Meet. So like they have one Google Meet that they're going to, and it's named, you know, Ms. McPartland's 4th grade class or something like that. So it's one Google Meet, one easy place to go. And one of the first lessons that we're teaching our students, even the youngest of students, is to set timers, even on that iPad. How do we set timers if they go off and do some sort of independent work where I'm going to give you like 20 minutes to do some of that work and do it on your own, and then we're going to come back together and answer some of your questions or something like that. So naming conventions, having all of the assignments and things like that in one place in a learning management system like Seesaw and Schoology is going to be important. Inviting the parents to be on board in some of those things. Obviously, it's going to take a little bit of learning for our students to get to that point. But as Don stated earlier, a lot of the first week lessons, we would normally do that in school. This is the way we line up, and this is the way we turn in our papers, and this is, those systems and routines that we do in school are going to be done online right now. Helping our teachers, helping alleviate some of the stress that the parents had with trying to find things. We have different ways that we're going to communicate this, but all in one place, and a definitely easier format for parents so that they don't feel as stressed. It's going to take some learning, but I know our students are going to be empowered to do some of this more on their own. And
I'll add, just being a middle school guy my whole career and as a teacher and administrator in middle school, one of the sad realities will be that the alarm clock will need to be used again by our middle school students. I know that many of them enjoyed a delayed awakening in the spring and kind of logged on if their friends were going to, or maybe I'll join, but I'm just gonna like pop in and then pop back out. I think that the expectations regarding accountability and grading and attendance, we recognize that being at home is not the same as school, but the expectations in terms of system and routine, that is going to be the expectation. When it's 8:05 and the bell rings in school, that's the time that kids need to be up and checked in, and they need to be ready at home the same as they would if they were in person. So a lot of that structure and accountability is built into just the very nature of having a system that is synchronous. Yes, parents can give tardy slips at home. Well, to be fair, I mean, that will be like the teachers will be taking attendance. Parents will not have to log in and take attendance for their child. They will have to take attendance. The teachers will take attendance as they normally would, and we'll be calling home like we normally would if a kid was not here. And again, when we see those patterns of a non-participation or non-attendance, then we'll be interacting with students just as we would be if they were in person. The principals will be following up. We have our progressive discipline that we would put in place. We need to make sure that kids understand that this time is different as well. So Brian's question is, what are the options for those families who have internet connectivity challenges or issues? And they range from, and first our data suggests that that's a pretty small percentage for us. So we're fortunate as a community. I think the increased demand for bandwidth is going to be a challenge, certainly, for some families too. But there are a number of internet providers that are offering sliding scale from free to reduced cost access based on family income. And then we have, as part of our CARES funds, some ability to support families directly. So depending on what the need is, we'll go through the building principles first, access those resources that are available, but we'll work through those situations on a case-by-case basis. Mm-hmm.
Amy, it's your friend Gonja again. Okay, so I have a tactical question. I know you answered me, but this is a kind of a parental question. It is about lunch break, okay? Especially for moms who have multiple children, they're trying to figure out if the lunch break is gonna be at the same time or at different times, because it's a whole nother set of schedule and challenges we have to create. Can you kind of answer that?
Yes, I can. So I get that, but we also were really trying to build our schedules that they would be the same as in person as they would be at home. And so what we were trying to do, because actually the goal is to get our students back, is to provide that consistency that the students really need. So, you know, lunch usually happens at, 11:20, it's going to happen the same at home as it would in school. So, and the same thing with the classes. So we really were focusing on the students and their consistency and the goal of bringing them back and having that tried and true schedule, because that schedule for the students is going to be important. All the research points to that consistency and routine for kids, and that is part of the routine, and it was just kind of impossible to do where we have a common lunch break across all of the schools at the same time.
If we need to pivot away from an in-person model, then we would be looking at reworking the schedule and have that capacity. But really the goal is, if we're in person, half of the kids are in person and half of the kids are home, that schedule remains the same regardless of setting, so that the group of students, that cohort model that we designed, that group of students stays together as a class. And that is part of the flexibility that we have in being able to offer multiple options for families. But if we go down a path where kids who are at home are taught by teachers who are home or taught as their own group, and kids that are in school are taught as their own group, then we would be able to rework some of those schedule questions.
Thank you for the clarity on that.
Mm-hmm. So if there aren't any other questions, we can move on. Again, I do want to thank my entire team, the entire Blueprint committee, all of the parents, teachers, staff, students, my administrative team, the leadership team, and you as board members for your input and helping us to continue to work through this process. This is the first pandemic that any of us has ever planned instruction for. And so we are, continue to stay focused on giving our best every day, knowing that it may not be perfect and it maybe needs to be updated and changed as we move forward. But overall, our goal is just to continue to be dedicated to just doing our best. And that's the only thing I can promise you is that we're going to work our butts off to make sure that we're giving you the very best that we can.
Thank you, Don, because the key to this is that we all have to be flexible. Parents, teachers, administrators, board members, we have to understand that nothing is going to be perfect that we put together. We are going to have to adapt, and you've said that from the very beginning.